let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it.
This week, we received a letter from a listener. They write, "Hey boys, I'm a newcomer to the pod and I've been listening to your back catalogue of episodes. I love the show. I recently listened to your episode about video games and I wanted to mention the new Saints Row game that's coming out in a couple of weeks. It is totally revamped character that lets you create some pretty realistic looking fat bodies. While the sliders don't necessarily let you go quite as far as I'd like, the results do look way better than fat characters you can make in other games I've played. The game doesn't come out until August 23rd. Oh, well, that's been and gone for us. But you can download the character creator Boss Factory for free right now and play around with it. So listeners, there you go. Bit of free advice there. Check out the new Saints Row game. Sorry, they also write, I love the show. Please keep up the awesome work. I don't have any real life friends who share this kink, so it really is amazing to sit down and listen to you guys just talk about it and everything related to it. I felt so alone in this regard for so long, and this absolutely helps. Keep doing what you do."
And that is why we do what we do.
Oh, well, to our dear listener, thank you very much for writing that. That makes me emotional, as these letters always do, because, you know, Tim, you and I have had this conversation how many times? And we'll have it how many times more, you know?
Yeah.
It really is because of other people that we do this, and helping people to feel less alone, creating something that people can use to help them make better informed decisions about their gains, to feel confident about their decision to gain, you know. So to that dear listener, we love you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for writing in.
Thank you. And everyone, if you'd like us to read your letter on the podcast, feel free to write to us at thiccradio@gmail.com.
What are we talking about today, James?
Today, you know, we're maybe looking to talk about something a little bit more in depth, and that thing that we're looking to touch base on is a CPAP unit.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well, I have one. I believe you have one as well.
I have a bit of a storied experience with mine, which we can explore a bit this episode.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because this is an example of how the fat experience intersects with the atypical bodied experience, or perhaps the disabled experience, if that's an appropriate way of describing it. Because, you know, as CPAP being a medical device is a form of aid. It is something that grants you an ability. The ability, you know, with glasses is to see more. The ability with a wheelchair is motion access and ambulance in your environment. And with a CPAP, it's the ability to sleep and rest your body more securely and safely. And as a medical practitioner, you know, I imagine you, even outside of your own personal use, have had quite a storied experience with them.
Yeah. You know, I used to think that sleep apnea, so when I apparently had sleep apnea as a teenager and didn't realize it. I guess this is something that can develop in juvenile years. I just thought that I was a snorer. I thought that I was someone who woke up frequently during the night. I kind of thought that it was all like bullshit, because someone would tell me like, you stopped breathing when you fell asleep. And I'm like, yeah, but I woke up, you know, my body said, hey, asshole, I can't breathe. And I woke up and I thought the problem solves itself until, you know, I was with my husband at the time, and he was really, really complaining about my snoring and that I wasn't breathing and that it was freaking him out and everything. So I finally went to go get a sleep study done, which I'll get into the intimate details of the sleep study that I had. But so then I got the machine, and I'm like, well, you know, I'm talking to the doctor, the pulmonologist, and I'm like, well, so what's the big deal here? Like, why does any of this matter? And the pulmonologist was like, well, you know, the fact that you wake up so often, the fact that you stop sleeping, you send your body into like little moments of hypoxia, meaning that your oxygen saturation dips below a safe level, you know, and you're doing this up to 15 or 20 times throughout the night. So it's affecting you during your waking hours. That's why you've got higher blood pressure. That's why you've got a higher pulse rate. That's why, your body temperature isn't being regulated properly. Your body is so focused on keeping you awake and putting one foot in front of the other to accomplish what you have to do during the day, that is causing all these other problems. So, I thought, well, I mean, can someone really smother to death in their sleep? And he's like, well, it's not as common as you think, but it is possible. That's why we have the CPAP machine. And I was like, all right, fine. I'll do this damn thing. And it took a little while to get used to. It is very, at first, it's very uncomfortable to have all that stuff on your face when you're trying to sleep.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of getting used to it. When you first turn the machine on, for anyone that has either lived with it, so they know what this is like, or someone who's about to get one, it takes a minute to adjust to breathing again, because you've got air going up your nose as you're trying to breathe out of your nose. So it's got this weird like air current thing going on where it kind of feels like you're not taking a deep enough breath, but as soon as you relax, it just sort of, everything begins to even out.
I mean, I've always had a very interesting experience with the concept of using it, because I've never had feedback necessarily on my snoring up until relatively recently. When I was actually relocating to the UK, I'd left my partner at the time, and that was its own situation, and we were fine in the end as friends. But it was interesting because it was the very last thing he said to me before I left. Like, it was my last teary hug goodbye. And he was like, "Oh, I should tell you." And I'm like, "What? You snore?" And I was like, "Okay."
Those are his parting words.
Those are his parting words. And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, you do." And I was like, "Okay. Goodbye." What do you do with that? And to be fair, it's that thing where some people have different sensitivity levels. Like, I grew up with a sister who, and she's never been diagnosed with this, but I'm pretty sure she has that form of like sonoric autism, because like I would chew on the other end of the table with my mouth closed, and she would fully scream at me at meal times about how loud I would chew with my mouth closed. Which led to me eventually not having dinner at the dinner table anymore, because I didn't like verbal abuse.
Well, yeah, I don't blame you there.
But it's that thing where I've always had this kind of back and forth with people. People are like, "Oh, didn't even notice you snore." Some people are like, "Yeah, it's bad." And so I'm always kind of sat there like, who can say? Who knows? Shrug. But it was one night living in this first place after I'd moved here to the UK. One of the housemates was studying medicine. And the following morning, while I was having some breakfast, she'd said to me, because her room was adjacent to mine, "Your snoring doesn't bother me, but one night I got up to pee and I noticed she'd stopped breathing because the snoring stopped, and I counted the seconds, and like you seemed to resume, and like it was fine." But she said to me, based on her training and understanding at that point, that was enough of a gap that it would be worth me getting it checked out. And to be fair, I was still relatively new to the UK. I'm sort of sat here like, I didn't even know what the first step of this whole process is, but we'll see. And it took me a good period of time to really get comfortable enough with the medical system here to go, okay, let me get tested and get sorted out. And so I did the test. They put me through for a referral. I did the sleep study. I put up photos on my Instagram where I had a little doohickey on my fingy, and then I went to sleep, and then they read the details, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you could totally use this." And then they gave me a unit, and then kind of abandoned me.
Yeah, they do that. They don't really do follow-ups after that. It's the same way in America. Like everything you need for like 30 days or whatever, and then they don't really do a follow-up. They just say like, call this phone number to order supplies, but they don't tell you that the supplies are not covered by your insurance. That was a bad surprise.
Yeah, it took me about 3 months. So the first week of using it, I think, was okay. But then it was in the second week of using it that I started really not being able to utilize it, because I would wake up in the middle of the night, hacking and coughing, because the amount of air that was going into my throat was so much. It was so dry that I was just wake up like I couldn't breathe.
Didn't you feel the humidity chamber?
I don't even. What is the humidity chamber?
So there's like on every CPAP there should be like a little drawer or a little plastic bit that comes out that you fill with water.
If there's one on my machine, I've never been told about it.
Yeah, almost all of them are supposed to come with it because, yeah, you're forcing dry air through your mucous membranes is going to cause them to dry out, crack, and you could potentially get sick from that. So
So
that's why there's supposed to be something to keep the air moist. Like mine has a chamber that I fill with distilled water that the air flows through that chamber to pick up the moisture and then goes.
because it took me 2 months of trying to call them for an appointment to say, hey, look, I'm having this problem. I'm not really able to utilize this machine. I don't feel comfortable using it because, quite honestly, at this current juncture, there's nothing. Because I was Googling, of course, because not able.
You're going to have to show it to me after this. I need to see your machine because maybe you're just not noticing where it is.
But when you say humidity anything, your words to my ears, first anyone's told me about this, and I've been to that hospital twice now with queries about why I'm experiencing these issues and what that potential problem could be. Because essentially, when I was able to get an appointment, they were like, oh, bring the machine and we'll, run a test on it and, we'll see. And, and I was like, okay. When I went back in to get the results, they were like, so it appears you haven't been using it. And so we're not able to determine like what the problem would be. And I was like, as I explained to you, I haven't been using it because of this reason. Oh, well, you just need a nasal spray. I was like,
well, maybe you have a model that doesn't include one, but that seems not right to me, because even so, like in my in nursing, when you put somebody on oxygen, there has to be a humidifier that is attached to it. So that way it's not straight up dry air, like flowing across your mucous membranes, right? Yeah. So like and sometimes it's completely like you have to sort of attach it to the concentrator in order for it to work. Sometimes they're built in, but yeah, that's very unusual that it would come with no kind of. The only time you ever see that happen in medicine is when you get those big cylinder oxygen tanks, like the metal ones that you have to like put on a knapsack kind of thing and put it on their wheelchair. Like those don't have a humidifier, but those are supposed to be short term.
But yeah, I tried using the nasal spray and then tried using the machine again, but it didn't make a difference for me, and the hospital continued to be very difficult to get a hold of. And in all honesty, like I've got a letter sitting over there from them being like, we've apparently tried to get in touch with you, you've been very difficult to get a hold of, to which I look at like, excuse me, that is literally not the case, but go off, sis. Basically saying, we want to try one more appointment before we have to discharge you for like just not being able to be a part of the system. So I'm fully at a point for myself where I'm very prepared to like drop off that unit and say, at least at this juncture in time, for me, this unit, this process, not going to work because I can't have this. And I'm sure you've probably learned this about me just being friends. Like, I try not to be a pest about things, but if a bitch has questions, I need to have answers, especially when I'm spending a third of my life, you want me to be attached to this machine to apparently help me to live better. You can't just kick me out and leave.
Yeah, that's but I wish I could say that it is like an exception to the rule, but no, it's that's what happens. They just don't follow up after that. I guess they just expect that you're an intelligent human that can figure out how to use a piece of machinery on your own, however complicated it might be. I mean, imagine if you were on a vent at night, because I've had patients where they're not vented during the day, but they have to go on a ventilator at night.
I don't know. Well, breaking news, listeners, I'm a fucking moron, apparently. Well, look, I mean, maybe I am, maybe I'm not.
I mean, you don't, if you don't know what the machine entails, and they don't explain it to you, it's not intuitive. It's not the most user-friendly piece of machinery.
There's an on-off button, and then there's one where you can manually redo the pressure if you want to up it or down it manually, even though it will just automatically adhere to you. And apparently the more you use it, the more it'll like equilibrium to what you're meant to be doing during the night. But like if you wake up in the night and the airflow is too much, you press the power button once and it like resets it back to like basic.
Oh, so yours doesn't automatically adjust.
It's meant to, but it doesn't.
Okay.
Like, I don't know. It's also got like the hospital's like mobile number on it. So I'm sat here like, maybe it's also a unit that like doesn't have all the features because it's meant to be like a training machine or something. Like,
no,
I don't know. But this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this episode, because I feel like, as you say, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of kicking you out of the nest and just kind of expecting you to figure it out for yourself. And also, it affects so many of us. And sometimes I do think, from the community perspective, we treat it like this really weird trophy of achievement, Which, look, it is what it is, but also just with the amount of just gap in knowledge that so many of us seem to have,
Yeah.
I find that curious. And I think it's just a conversation that needs to happen with more people.
Well, then let's take it to let's start at the very beginning with CPAP. What does it stand for? CPAP stands for continuous positive airway pressure, meaning that when you, the reason why you might need a CPAP machine is snoring does not always equal sleep apnea, but snoring is often an indication of sleep apnea. the soft palate, which is the very back of your mouth, right before your uvula or right after your uvula, I'm bad at this part of the anatomy, relaxes too much and it begins to block off your tracheal opening at the top of your esophagus. And it can do that for up to a minute before your body sort of jolts yourself awake. And you're like, that's why if you're waking up frequently or you're waking up gasping for breath, that's usually what's happened.
Okay.
So the machine will compensate for that. It will continually force positive air, meaning that it's going in instead of out. Like it's positive and negative about going in and out. This only goes in. So it's positive air going up your nose through your nasal passages and then, down the back of the throat to the lungs, breathing like a normal person would. If the machine senses that there's been a change in air pressure, as in you're not exhaling anymore, like all it's sensing is the positive air going through, it will then force more positive air through. It'll increase the pressure so that it will force that soft palate open again and you begin to breathe normally again. And then as you start to breathe normally again, it disengages and goes back down to a lower pressure setting.
Okay.
And why is sleep apnea such a problem? Well, like I had said in the beginning of the episode, it can lead to a host of other side effects: high blood pressure, high pulse, can actually lead to weight gain, but it's not something that I recommend. I don't think that anyone who has sleep apnea and wants it for the reason to gain weight, that's a pretty dangerous game you're playing. So I wouldn't recommend that. But sleep apnea can happen as early as your teenage years, and you might not realize it. And it's not always related to weight. Now, lots of overweight people end up with sleep apnea because you have to think about there's a lot of weight when you're laying flat that's going on your chest, and it's causing you to take shallower breaths. Now, I was 125 pounds with sleep apnea, so there are things that, there are exceptions to that. But
I used to work with a woman whose teenage daughter, and not to say she was underweight, but she was certainly on the skinnier side of humanity's spectrum, and she was being tested for sleep apnea, for a CPAP, and this was back in the day where you had to go to a clinic and actually sleep in the clinic overnight.
yeah, I had to do that.
I was very lucky, and I just got little doohickey on the finger to do the thing for me. But I mean, so how long have you actually had your CPAP for?
It's going on 15 years.
15 years. And so
yeah.
I don't know if you can recall your quality of sleep and quality of life prior to it.
Well, I can tell you that I know that, say, if I'm on the couch and I'm dozing off watching a TV show or a movie or something like that, I will wake up gasping for air because that's just how I used to sleep before I got the machine. I don't go upstairs and lug it downstairs for when I want to lay on the couch and watch TV. So that's pretty much how my sleep had gone prior to this machine. And even though I still don't sleep all the way through the night. But I mean, I toss and turn a lot less. I wake up a lot less, and I still feel more rested when I have used it as opposed to when I have not. There have been times where I'm going out of town for a day trip, meet up with some friends, we go out, we get drunk, I can't drive home, I have to crash, have a miserable night's sleep, finally get home and then get to take a good nap with my CPAP on. Yeah, it is an improvement if you can get used to it.
Okay. Fair enough. I mean, I think that that's sort of the curiosity for me. It's like how that market differences for people, because I think for me, despite the sort of insistence from doctors, like, oh, it's a very extreme case in your case, I wouldn't wake up in the night, like wake up and like have to do stuff. It's more like I would wake up needing to pee, which is stock standard, and I've never woken up like gasping for air, except in those instances where the machine had left me with that dry throat.
Mhm.
In which case, sure, yeah, going, and then I need like water straight away, because like it feels like if I cough, the entire lining of my throat is going to shred. I'm just going to start coughing up blood or something, you know. But
I think I came to the realization how important it was when, okay, I don't know how many people have had this happen to them. So listeners, if you've had this happen, you know what this is like. But so you know, I was sleeping on the couch one day. I could feel that I couldn't breathe. You know that weird place you are in between sleep and awake where you get that sleep paralysis thing going on, where it's like part of your brain is awake and it wants to get up and it's like, shit, I can't breathe, something's happening. And like you want to move, but you're in that sleep paralysis moment. So you can't even move yet. You wake fully up and then you're like, you know, that's happened to me a lot. And I was like, okay, I think this is genuinely a problem. So if that's happening to you out there listening, definitely go get a sleep study done.
okay.
They've come a long way because James, you said you got to do it at home, right?
Yeah, so it was this little doohickey, and I cannot remember. No, an oximeter. An
Yeah, pulse
oximeter.
ox.
That's what it
Yeah.
was called. And literally, it's like a little clasp, and it doesn't
Hmm.
pierce your finger for blood or anything. It's like, it's just, you know, like when you were a kid and you have those little ball clips, and like you would open it and like stick it on the end of your finger to like watch
Yeah.
it pink. It's like that, but not nearly as tight, but it's a little tight. And you wear it over your pointer finger, and
Hmm.
like it clasps around your wrist, and there's a little button on top, and they will tell you this has been set for you. It's got enough battery so that it works over the night. Literally, like when you're about to go to sleep,
Hmm.
on, press it on so you can see it's working, go to sleep. And
Yeah, my experience was very different.
walk us through your experience, this whole in-house situation. I want to do
So
this.
yeah, so they said we think you need to get a sleep study done. So I scheduled it. I scheduled it at a sleep center, which I don't know if they do these anymore now that CPAP, I mean, now that sleep studies can be done at home, they may not have sleep centers anymore. But so I went there and it looks like a motel, except, you know, it's run by nurses and there's a lot of medical equipment, but the rooms look like little motel rooms. You've got a bed, you've got a dresser, you've got a bathroom, and you've got a TV. And they tell you to arrive a couple of hours early just to sort of get used to the room, try to get relaxed. So showed up early. I had already eaten dinner, so I'm just laying on bed watching TV. And then these two nurses come in. They're like, "We're going to prepare you for the sleep study." So they proceed to begin to wire me into all these machinery. So they put on they put wires on my head. They use this special kind of like skin putty or skin cement or something so that the wires would stay attached to certain points on my scalp, on my forehead. Then they put like a band around all of that. Then they put another set of electrodes on like my neck around my clavicle. They put wires on my arms, on my legs. They put a band around my chest. They put a band around my stomach. They hooked me up to the machine, and then they were like, "Okay, good night." And I'm like, "How the fuck am I supposed to sleep with all this shit all over me?"
See, that makes me so curious, right? Like, so you've worked with oximeters before, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So all of that showmanship, nodes here, electrodes here, a bit of skin putty, an elastic band, a bangle and a torch, and a clamp, and a scalpel, and a scrape, and a twist, and all of this. Like, how the fuck can an oximeter read all that information?
Well, here's the thing. I think the reason why mine was so involved was because sleep studies must have changed the way that they diagnose things as well. There must be separate sleep studies for sleep apnea as opposed to other like nighttime problems because they had like I was asking about, you know, what is all this about? Like, why I have to do all this shit? And I was answering like questionnaires about what do you do in your sleep. And I guess for some people, they literally act their dreams out in their sleep. Like, say they're having a dream about riding a bike, they will be doing the motion of riding a bike while they are in bed. And like, that was one of the things that they wanted to try and see. Okay, is that a problem that you have? Is this other thing a problem that you have? Like, I guess they were trying to run a gamut to figure out why you have this problem.
Right.
But now the pulse oximeter, you just put it on your finger and it will read your oxygen saturation throughout the night. So when you're breathing normally and you have no problems, say you're at 100%, then you start to snore. It's going to probably drop down to like 93 or 94%. Then you get the sleep apnea that starts happening. You go through those periods of not breathing. It's going to start dropping and dropping and dropping. And it's very dangerous to have a pulse ox that drops below. I mean, 93 is like supposed to be the lowest that you're allowed to go without giving someone oxygen. But, you know, on a sleep apnea study, like they can drop as low as the low 80s, which is dangerous. That means 20% of your oxygen has been depleted.
So, I mean, as a curiosity, you know, obviously you can recognize benefits from using a CPAP. Do you feel like there have been downsides?
I mean, the only downside is it's not comfortable to wear until you get used to it. Like to have all this junk on it, especially like, because there's different types of masks too. I wear a mask that it only goes under my nose because I don't breathe through my mouth when I sleep. But a lot of people are mouth breathers when they sleep. So then you have to get the whole thing that goes around your nose and your mouth. You look like Darth Vader, you know, and you're breathing through this huge plastic cup with a hose coming out of it. I mean, it's not flattering looking. You don't look cool with it on.
No, and there's that TikTok meme where people were using the sound from Top Gun, and like it was all these bears putting on their CPAP mask. You know, like
yeah, and if the mask gets a little bit like askew during the night, like you roll over too hard, the mask gets knocked a little bit some way, you're gonna get like air shooting into your eye, or you're gonna get it like shooting onto your forehead.
Oh my God, yes, like the fucking mask they gave me is this pure like silicone rubber fucking thing that honestly just at no point would it like sit on me in the right way. Like it was either like my left eyeball or like the right passage of my nose up to my forehead, which is ridiculous. You know,
they do nothing to help with congestion. If you are congested, you're still going to be miserable because these do nothing to help with that. Air flowing through your nasal passages will do nothing to relieve congestion. Yeah. So like if you're prone to seasonal allergies and get stuffy, get yourself like if it's nighttime, take some Benadryl. It'll help you sleep. If it's during the daytime, you know, take like get one of those nasal sprays with like a corticosteroid in it. Like they will do no help for you with congestion.
No, and you know, one of my best things for congestion in general, and this is also a recommendation for anyone who is a performer, and I'm not sure their availability in other places, but in Australia, it's basically like the plastic cup, like what we were talking about, but it's adhered on a small spout onto this like little, what it kind of looks like a giant sippy cup, but instead of having like the little sippy bit that like the kid drinks through, it's like the hose that feeds into the mask. And the idea is that in this chamber, you filled it with like eucalyptus oil and hot water. And through this mask, you literally just adhered it to your face and you're just, and like you're trying to like suck in as much of this like hot steam to like get the gunk to come out as possible. And you tend to find that like once you crack it open, you see all the grot floating in the oil.
So it's kind of like a neti pot, except that it's a closed system.
Kind of, yeah. But you know, it's not obviously a glamorous thing. Like you can feel the gunk like in your mouth that you have to like spit into the thing or like building out of your nose. Like it's not glamorous. But if we're talking congestion, you know, it's all about getting the crap out of you. So you just kind of learn to be like and like kind of like getting it like
that's how I look when I'm using my neti pot. Like my eyes are watering and like there's all this water flowing out. I'm like, God, if anyone saw this.
Just since we're talking about
this is the most unsexy thing ever.
But you know, on that point, you know, talking about like other things that we kind of use in relation to that kind of like nasal thing, like are you on any medication for any conditions otherwise related to your gains, like high blood pressure?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because I had high blood pressure when I was a teenager. This is the thing, is there was a lot of stuff that was happening to me as a teen that I didn't know. The sleep apnea was one thing, the high blood pressure was another. We just didn't go to the doctor that often because me and my sisters, we didn't get sick that often. We got sick maybe once every 5 or 6 years. And so, middle class family, mom wanted to save money, didn't really book any appointments except for like the yearly checkup that like insurance requires. So I had higher blood pressure than I should have when I was around 17. And I didn't actually get it diagnosed and have something done about it until I was 27.
Mm-hmm.
Because one night I thought I was having a heart attack. And they were like, no, your blood pressure is just ridiculously friggin' high. Like, and this was before I started really gaining weight. I mean, I put a little bit on, but I was by no means throwing myself into it yet. And they're like, yeah, we need to put you on something to regulate this.
Yeah.
So they couldn't figure it out why. When I went to I had gone to the emergency room where they told me your blood pressure's too high and they prescribed me a pill. But then when I went to my doctor, he was like, well, he's at the time, he was like, it's not your weight, because I think I was 160 or something. And he's like, it just must be genetics. So
Well, it's interesting. You and I have similar experiences with the mothers and with the medical, but I come from countries where healthcare is free. So it's not even about like the cost of things, but I do come from a family where, and I don't know how many people have this experience, but coming from very like working class stock, you don't go to the doctor if you're not sick. And where I come from, sick is no, you need the hospital. So,
so not just a flu, you have to be like convulsing and shitting blood before they'll take it.
I could have been lying on my back, having my arm sliced off at the elbow joint, bones sticking out. My mother would have come over with a pot of Vaseline and a couple of bandages and said, "It's okay, we'll just rub this on there, it'll be fine." It's just a scratch, Jim. Jim, this is...
But in a country where healthcare is free, that doesn't make sense. Like, at least in the US, with the enormous cost of healthcare, like I get why, middle class families are like, we don't go to the doctor unless a bone is broken or somebody is about to die. Like,
I don't know, girl. It's just the way I was raised. And so as a result, I almost never went. In fact, growing up and really considering the scope of my lifetime, I've been to the doctor more times since moving to the UK than I ever did back in Australia. And prior to the move, the only times that I'd ever been to a doctor, period, was for immunization shots and when my sister gave birth. That was it. Had otherwise never stepped foot to talk to someone about potential medical things, about potential assessments of things, because I'd just grown up with this understanding that if you don't need to go to the doctor, you don't go to the doctor.
Yeah.
So, I think this is also something where it's important that as individuals, we learn to overcome that internalized expectation of health, this expectation of, I don't see it, therefore it's not a problem. But also speaking a little bit to this internalized fear of health, the idea I have to acknowledge that I've been feeling a little bit of some kind of a way, then I might have to acknowledge that there is a problem. And if I go to a doctor to get that assessed and get the official diagnosis of here is your problem, then you have to account for that and have to live your life differently or factor in some other form of being, which I think is a fear really rooted in ableism, because it's the idea of what we're afraid of is the idea that we ourselves might become disabled. We are afraid of achieving this state of being, which is ironic because so much of gaining, even if we don't want to acknowledge it, is the idea of achieving a form of disability. Because many of us really do seem to be aiming to achieve the weights and dimensions of people whose ambulance and physicality and health and all of those things are affected by our size. So, this is a very big conversation. And to be fair, listeners, this is one we're going to come back to on a number of different subjects, a number of different times. This is not the last you will hear about this from us. But it's a conversation that needs to be had about how we as a community approach personal health and how we approach ourselves from a disabled perspective, from a human perspective, from a health perspective, and what that even means. Because even stripping gaining away, the conversation about obesity and health and expectations on health and this narrative of health within obesity is so nuanced. It's very difficult to have a conversation without feelings being arced up because we just don't have a framework
there's not good language around it, you know. Whenever someone has that brought up as a means of like, okay, your health is beginning to be compromised because of your weight, you know, there's been no like good language created in order to like explain that in a respectful way. And doctors, I know this is something of a blanket statement because there are great doctors out there who are very sympathetic. By and large, most of the doctors that I have encountered in my profession are very straightforward. They don't mince words, they don't sugarcoat anything, and they're like, look, this is what's happening, this is what you need to do, you know, you're paying me to be here. So like, you know, they have that kind of attitude about it. And I think that you're right, that that's going to flare up a lot of baggage for people, a lot of insecurity, a lot of like, and then I also think on a small level that a lot of people, like, you know, who hypochondriacs are in your life, right? The people who always have something going wrong with them, they never seem to get any better, they're in and out of the ER all the time, they got doctor's appointments at the wazoo, they're taking like 30 pills in a sitting. I think people feel like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be that person. I want to be that person who's always like bugging the doctor, going into the ER and screaming at nurses and screaming at doctors and demanding things and yada. You know, I think people sometimes are afraid of becoming that too.
Yeah. I do want to reference it. You know, there's a fantastic little show. I don't know if you've heard of it, called The Golden Girls. Are you familiar? Have you
No, I've never heard of it.
never heard of it? Never.
Never heard of it. Never heard of
it. Never. Lesbian. Bro.
Lesbian.
Lesbian. But of course, the episode I'm referencing is one where Dorothy was experiencing some physical unwellness, and she was seeing her doctor, and her doctor was very dismissive of her, and it turns out she needed to go to like 5 or 6 different places before she was finally seen for something. And while the reasoning behind why she was dismissed is a little dissimilar to obese patients, they do carry over a sense of infantilization, because yes, Dorothy, being an older woman in the show, is being said, you know, women of your age, imagine up being issues, or it could just be a side effect of getting old because you are old, and dismissing her as being crazy or thinking about things too hard. And with obese patients, oftentimes people who are very aware of their body will go to doctors, and doctors will minimize what they're experiencing by saying you need to lose weight first.
Yeah,
even if it has nothing to do.
I hate this, but if a doctor sees obesity on your diagnosis list, a lot of whatever's wrong with you is going to go right back, because that's going to be the easiest answer for that doctor, rather than the doctor performing all of these different tests on you and finding out what could really be the problem. Because remember that 90% of medicine is just figuring out what's not wrong with you. Like, they will see the obesity diagnosis and they'll be like, well, that's it, it's because you're fat, that's why you got high blood pressure, your head's come off, your arms are rotting, it's because you're overweight.
Boom. And you know, this is its own conversation on how, you know, as people who are trying to achieve obesity, we need to do a lot more work into looking into fat bias, into medical fat phobia, into all of these things that can affect every single one of us. Because I think a lot of us maybe do come from a background similar to either yourself or myself, where we don't go to the doctor because nothing's wrong. And by the time things start to manifest as being particularly wrong for any number of different reasons, we probably have put on a lot of weight. And we exist in the privilege of being in smaller bodies where we don't have medical fat phobia against us. Then by the time we go into the hospital, we're looking and we're saying, hey, I'm just a normal person just like you. Fatty, bariatric surgeon. Get on the bed now. Get the pump, get the hose, get the vacuum. Fatty, cut him open, cut the fat off his fat, ugly body. You know, and it's going to really catch a lot of people off, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So,
you know, another thing that can happen quite often is, so this is like, if you're a younger person, if you're under 40 and, you know, you're starting to get curious, like you're getting older and you're like, okay, should I have certain tests done at certain points in my life? Should I get an echocardiogram? Should I get a colonoscopy? Should I do this, that, the other? The doctor may look at you and say, no, you're too young, don't worry about it, go away. I've had that happen. I can't tell you how many times. I've asked my doctor, look, I'm approaching 40. Should I get an echocardiogram? Because I don't know what my injection fraction is. I don't know if I have any clogged arteries. I don't know any of this shit. No, you're too young. Come back later. Come back when you're 50.
100%. Do I have encephalitis? Who can say?
Who can say? Because I won't test you because you're too young.
And it's one of those things where it's like, this may be a little bit off the verge of the CPAP thing specifically, but again, I think this is an important entryway conversation on how, as people and as a community, we just don't have a language or just a process. Okay, here's the thing. From a sex perspective, we are so quick to give each other heads ups on like, oh, if you really want to put on weight fast, try avocado, put oil in your shake, do this, do that. Oh, if you want really good fat boy clothes, go to this place, go to this website. Like when it comes to just the aesthetic and the achievement of the thing, we're really good at like reaching out and giving advice, even if that advice is bullshit and unwarranted and not helpful and untested. And let's not even get into that right now because that's its own thing. But
can you imagine what like gainer community infomercials would be like? And the crawl that would have to happen at the bottom of the screen that says that none of this is not approved by the FDA. This is only the opinion of the person selling the product. This warning, side effects may include
yeah. This advertisement is not approved by Grokio Limited, Beefy Frat Ltd. This is not approved by And of course you would have someone with a very buttery, of course, smooth voice saying something like, has this ever happened to you? And of course you have to cast white people only because you only get because you only get white people in infomercials, and it's all
what's up with that?
It's because white people are useless, and it's always it's like someone's trying to open a pantry door and they can't pick up a bowl So
some of those things are for the stupidest things you've ever seen.
Which is fabulous, but that's exactly what I want out of a gainer infomercial. Like, has this ever happened to you?
Like, so what's like some kind of magical cream that you can just rub on your belly and it'll grow bigger overnight or something, and it's just like composed of like mayonnaise and coconut oil.
A cream made of mayonnaise and coconut oil. That sounds more like a wax removal strip than it does a cream. God. Oh, but I digress. Because, as I was saying before, listeners, I think this is the reason why we want to start kicking off this conversation, because this isn't the first time we've really kind of touched on this a bit, but it's the first time that we really are digging into it, and I think we need to dig into this more, and with as many guests as possible. So just a quick shout out, if anyone listening wants to contribute to these types of specific medicalized conversations, please write to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. We'd be glad to have you on to talk.
What do you think of people who use like having to go on a CPAP as like a sort of triumph? Like, oh, I've made it. I'm part of the really big boys club now. Like, and you see sometimes certain gainers will take pictures of themselves with it on as a sort of like badge of pride.
I mean, bitch, if that wasn't me. Because, like, why did I take a picture of me with my little oximeter on, doing a little hand thing? Because I wanted to be like, look out, boys, I'm coming through, getting the thing done, da-da-da-da-da. And, in a way, I see the positive, because we are trying to create a positive narrative, championing the use of medical aid. Yeah. And I do see the benefit in that, and I think it's important to view it from that perspective. But that's a very particular perspective. We're not viewing it through that lens. We're viewing it through the lens of, I'm so fat, I need this because without this I could die.
Yeah.
It's not the whole, I have achieved the body that I want, who happens to require this by virtue of existence. It's saying, I got so fat through my dick wanting me to get fat that I now have to have this. And yes, from a fetish perspective, like, there is a kink to that. It's the indulgence, the glutton, the, oh fuck, I've gone so far past the point of no return that this is happening. Totally get that. But again, I come back to this point. When it comes to the reality of the gaining experience, I don't think we talk about it enough, and I don't think we talk about it with the right language.
No, we don't. I will admit I am very torn on this idea of it being a badge of honor kind of thing. Because like the fetish side of me is like, yeah, that's amazing. That's hot. Like, he's getting so big, he needs this now. The medical professional in me is like, well, but would you celebrate if that person needed an artificial heart or a kidney transplant, or, like suddenly developed like the kind of diabetes where they have to get a pancreas transplant? Like, would I celebrate those things? And I'm like, no, I mean, I wouldn't celebrate it. It wouldn't be like, oh, good for you. You ate so much that your heart gave out and now you have to have a machine do all the work for you. Like, that just seems intrinsically wrong.
Yeah.
But I can also understand why guys really get into this idea of, look, I have really achieved something now. Like my body is so fat that when I go to sleep, it could kill me. And I need this now. Like I can't really fault him, but I am torn on whether or not it's a good or bad thing.
I get that. But I think that's why for me, it's about understanding the duality. And again, we have touched on this how many times, fantasy versus reality. Yes, it is sexy for this particular thought, but it's like when I made the point about the belly busting, the button busting, sorry, off my shirt at work, from a fetish perspective, oh man, I've gotten so fat, I'm popping buttons at work. Fuck, that's really hot. But in the moment, when I'm at work, I am mortified because if someone sees me with my belly hanging out because I've been such a fat ass that I've popped a button, that looks super duper unprofesh.
Yeah, it does. It does. There's no getting around that. There's no office setting where that will just be unacceptable.
And again, we talk about the fantasy perspective very, very well, but we do not talk about the reality. And this is something that I would love to see change in the community. I would love to see, you know, like at Grommr is, yes, the fantasy convention where it's like people are doing, you know, a fucking pig play in this room where, you know, there's someone who's dressed up as a professional chef who's, you know, created these life-size ovens that people are trussed up like pigs, coated in oil and shoved inside with a little heat lamp, give them the fantasy being cooked like a pig. Great. Mm-hmm. But I also want a medical conference. I also want medical professionals in the community who can actually sit down and be like, guys, let's talk. Let's have a forum. Let's have a conversation. Let's explore this together because we need to be more than just sex, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm loving this conversation. I think it's just so juicy. I do want to ask you, do you feel like there's an aspect of utilizing a CPAP or other weight adjacent meds that people would otherwise be unaware of? Like, I mean, you pointed out to me about this fucking humidity thing. We're gonna have to chat about this afterwards.
Yeah. But are you talking like, could you use a CPAP or other medications? Like, how else would you use them other than intended? Like, I'm trying to figure out what.
No, I mean, like, I didn't know about this humidity thing that you're going to show me afterwards. So it's like, are there aspects to like having to use a CPAP or like other weight gain meds that people just aren't aware of because nobody talks about it?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. Because the thing about like, you know, meds related to problems that you've developed from weight gain are usually blood pressure, diabetes meds, or, you know, some kind of cardiac med, you know, something that's meant to thin your blood so you don't get a stroke, or something to reduce cholesterol so you don't have a heart attack. Yeah, I can't really think of any unusual, or I can't think of things that people don't usually think of, you know, because pills are pretty straightforward. You take a pill every day, you know, the problem's supposed to be solved. The CPAP, you sleep with it every night, you're supposed to sleep better. So
no, completely understandable. Do you feel like you've ever encountered anyone who was like fetishized your use of CPAP?
No one's fetishized my use of it, but I definitely see it being fetishized, you know. Like I've seen it like Grokio apps, Tumblr, you know, everywhere where it's like, oh, it's hot because he has to use this. Or guys will take pictures in it. You know, like I don't know who the gainer was, but I'll never forget there was a picture of this guy. He was in one of those hospital style beds, you know, the ones that like are adjustable and you see in every standard hospital. He had a plate of donuts on his gigantic belly and he had his CPAP on his face, you know, with the hose coming out and everything. I don't know who he was, but I mean, that's clear. That photo was clearly meant to inspire desire in somebody. So
no, that makes perfect sense to me. And we've kind of touched on this bit already, but do you have any advice for someone who
if they think they need one or if they just want to get one?
I want to break this down into two. Do you have any advice for people who think they may need one, genuinely need one,
genuinely like worried that they stop breathing in the night? Okay,
that's the first one.
Yeah, just contact your primary care physician if you don't have one. You can just be sort of picked up by a generalized practitioner. Call, a doctor's office that is close to you. Ask, is this doctor accepting new patients at this time? If they say yes, they say, well, I'd like to be put down as a new patient. They'll ask for your medical history, and then they'll say, well, why do you want to see them? They say, possible like sleep apnea. I think I need a sleep study. Usually they will set it up without any problem. They don't usually argue with that kind of thing. You have the sleep study done at home, or you may have to go to a sleep center. I don't know if those still exist. And then they'll tell you if you actually have the problem. If you don't have the problem, if you don't lose any oxygen while you're sleeping, or you don't stop breathing, you don't need it.
Yeah.
And they'll also tell you how severe yours is. Mine was apparently very severe, so it's a good thing that I got one. If you don't actually need it, but you want one, I would say don't pursue that, because they are very expensive piece of, it's like $7,000 for one of these things, right? And the sleep study on top of it is another cost, and the maintenance of the machine is another cost. So if you don't need one, I'd say just give up. It's not worth having it for aesthetic reasons, or just so that you can feel like you're one of us, I guess.
Yeah, I would say the same. If you need it, pursue the channels for it.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't need it, it's fine. It will either come in time or it won't come in time, and that's fine too.
If you really don't need one, but you want it just for the aesthetics, or because it'll make you feel some type of way, I guess make one yourself out of just whatever, and you can pretend.
Contact a bitch who's got a 3D printer, and make it out of plastic, and get yourself a little bit of fake hosing or some shit. I don't know, like your cosplay, figure it out. But $7,000, no thank you. The second bit of advice I kind of want you to speak to, if you can, is for anyone who currently has a CPAP and maybe isn't feeling it, maybe isn't sure about it.
It takes an adjustment. I did not get fully adjusted and have used to having it on me at night for a good 6 months. It just took that time to get used to, and your body will adjust, your sleep will adjust, because whereas I may have used to roll over so much into the pillow that my face would be somewhat smashed into it, my body doesn't really do that anymore. Now I kind of just occupy a different spot on the bed. When you first put it on, like I said, it's an adjustment because the air is going in as you're trying to breathe out, so you have to get used to that. Sometimes just taking a few deep breaths will help to even you and the machine out, and it'll calm you down. Replace the filters whenever you have to. I think it's usually 3 months you replace the filter. Do that because the filters get pretty crappy. If it has a humidity chamber, make sure that that's filled so that you're not just forcing cold, dry air through your nose. And if you have any problems, follow up with the pulmonologist. Call them, because they're not going to call you. So call them and say and you may run into the same problem that James ran into, where people are like, oh, I don't have time for your shit. They don't help you out. But just be persistent if you really think there's a problem with it, or you think you need a different type of machine. I could tell you, over in the US, Walgreens has started carrying pieces and parts of CPAP machines that you can purchase without insurance, and you don't have to go to the pharmacist. They're out in an aisle somewhere. So that's where I get all my supplies now. I go to Walgreens, I buy new tubing, I can buy a new headgear piece, I can buy a new mask. You just can't get the machine itself.
But Tim, I think that brings us to the end of this week's episode. Do you feel like there's anything that we haven't really spoken about yet?
I don't think so. But if you have any questions, write us.
Yeah. And as we said before, this is not the beginning and it's not the end. This is just another leg in wanting to really have this conversation about the intersection of gaming, health, disability, and all of those beautifully nuanced conversations. So if you find that you intersect with any of those, please get in touch with us. We'd love to have you on the show to have a talk about your experience, your learnings, your understandings, and to keep the conversation going from there. But that brings us to the end of yet another episode. So thank you so much for joining us today. That's a wrap. Please remember to like and subscribe. Please rate us 5 stars and leave a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and beefyfrat at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and beefyfrat at thiccymouse. You can also look us up on TikTok at Thicc Radio or our website at www.podpage.com/Thicc Radio. And once again, if you want to submit any questions or ideas for episodes, you can reach us at thiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stan and Thiccy Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by Stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.